Well, hello. Good afternoon and welcome. I want to welcome you all here. I'm Douglas Northrup. I'm the acting director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia this year. I'm also a professor of history and Middle East studies here at U of M. This month at WCEE, as many of you know, we've been very pleased to present a film series. This has been co-sponsored by Humanity Funds, by the Department of Film, Television, and Media, and also by CREASE. That's our Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies here at Michigan. And we're very grateful for the co-sponsorships. This has been a film series designed to commemorate and build up to the 4th anniversary of the outbreak of all-out war in Ukraine. Over the last several weeks, we've screened several documentary films that together were identified to highlight various experiences of the conflict through stories of resilience and strength, grit, grief, and spirit. We hope and I believe that these films about survival amid destruction and also about the new kinds of cooperation and solidarity that can arise in conditions of tragedy and conflict can also offer some notes of hope and determination alongside the all too real tragedy that we all know. I do want to make just one very brief note of an additional event we have scheduled to mark this anniversary. That is tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. downstairs in Weiser Hall 555 and also online. We have another lecture, showcase lecture, on the roots of Russia's war in Ukraine, being delivered by Professor Serhiy Kelchik, who's coming here from the University of Victoria in British Columbia, one of the world's experts on these questions. Tonight we end our film series in a culminating event, I might say, with Lina. As you will see, this is the story of a 5-year-old who is caught between the front lines of free and Russian-occupied Kherson. The film chronicles the efforts to rescue her, how those unfold, and considers the aftermath. Her efforts to strive for a normal life, even as the war has left deep scars on her and those around her. After the film, I'll just flag now for you, please don't leave. We have a panel discussion scheduled with several distinguished guests. We have Ambassador Craig Johnstone here, Sylvia Ellison, Nathaniel Raymond. You'll hear more about them after the film in a discussion to be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Danielle Leavitt here, one of our Weiser Center postdoctoral fellows, who's also an up-and-coming leading historian of Ukraine and the Soviet Union. So without further ado, thank you all for coming and enjoy the film.
We'll welcome up all of our panelists. We are delighted to be joined by 3 distinguished panelists here with us tonight to discuss elements of this film and themes that it relates to. We have with us Sylvia Ellison, first as senior humanitarian and development leader with deep experience designing and delivering programs in crisis and conflict settings. As vice president of Save Ukraine US, Ellison informs and drives positioning, strategy, U.S. government engagement, and partnerships that strengthen the rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration of children and families affected by war. Previously, Sylvia was at Creative Associates International, and her portfolio there included leading organizational learning and systems strengthening efforts, as well as designing and implementing basic education, youth, anti-trafficking, workforce development, and stabilization initiatives across multiple countries, including Albania, Afghanistan, Bulgaria, Jordan, Romania, Sri Lanka, Uganda, Morocco, and Yemen. Formally trained in the A.K. Rice approach to group relations and organizational systems consulting, Sylvia also serves on the board of Creative Learning. We're grateful to have Sylvia Ellison with us. We're also honored to be joined by Ambassador Craig L. Johnstone, co-founder of the Humanity Funds. Johnstone served in Vietnam from 1965 to 1970 and was the 6th ambassador to Algeria. In 2007, he served as the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees. He continues to pursue his passion for helping refugees and people affected by war by co-founding the Humanity Funds, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women and children in conflict zones, which you saw in part in this documentary. Finally, we are pleased to have with us Nathaniel A. Raymond, the executive director of the Humanitarian Research Lab at the Yale School of Public Health and a lecturer in the Department of Epidemiology of Microbial Diseases at the Yale School of Public Health. He was formerly a lecturer of global affairs at the Jackson School for Global Affairs from 2018 to 2022. Raymond's research interests focus on the health implications of forced displacement, methodologies for the assessment of large-scale disasters, including pandemics, and the human rights and human security implications of information communication technologies, ICTs, for vulnerable populations, particularly in the context of armed conflict. Previously, he was the founding director of the Signal Program on Human Security and Technology at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, HHI, of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health from 2012 to 2018. From 2010 to 2012, he was the director of operations for the George Clooney-founded Satellite Sentinel project at HHI, which utilized high-resolution satellite imagery to detect and document attacks on civilians in Sudan and South Sudan. Please join me in welcoming this panelist, this panel with a round of applause. Thank you. We're going to hear brief remarks from each of them, following which we'll have an opportunity for Q&A from the audience. So I think we'll begin from here to the end with Ambassador Johnstone. Thank you.
My name is Craig Johnstone. I'd like to start off by saying that you have in your midst a real heroine, a real hero of for Ukraine, and that is a young lady that went with us to Ukraine and who chipped in and helped a great deal, and then decided to enroll in the University of Michigan. And Cameron, would you stand up and take a round of applause? She, more than anyone, is responsible for this event here today. So, and thanks again for all that you have done for the Ukrainian people. We run an organization that is designed to mainly focus on women and children in Ukraine. We started off by going to Bucha right after the atrocities there, looking at the legal implications of everything that had been done, the most barbaric scenery you could possibly imagine. I mean, just massive troops and rapes and killings and summary executions, many of them done under orders. That is to say, when some of the people who were actually engaged in it called back and asked what they should be doing, they would get the orders to kill them all. It was really a bloody and horrible event and demonstrated the brutality that we have seen for the 4 years that have come since those early days. But the people of Bucha came back very, very strong. They were extraordinarily resilient. They've moved back into their places, they've repaired their buildings, and they participate in daily life as though nothing had happened, except, of course, at night when they all take shelters to save themselves from the incoming rockets and drone attacks. But it's symbolic of what it is, what has happened in Ukraine overall. Brutality on the part of the Russians and extraordinary strength on the part of the Ukrainians, a resilience that is absolutely remarkable, and a capacity to survive and to fight a war where the odds are stacked against them. So we're pleased, we're honored as the Humanity Funds to be doing what we're doing there. We're running a big campaign right now for the winter. We have delivered over 600 sleeping bags, and we've delivered EcoFlows, battery systems and generators, and provided a heating point at the Aviation University. And I could go on for some time, including the rescue of 4 additional children, bringing us to 18 children that have been rescued as a result of the funding provided by the Humanity Funds. And the rescuing organization is Save Ukraine. And shall I turn it over to Save Ukraine? There we are. Do you have?
So I think I have.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Is it working? So thank you so much for the invitation. First, I'm excited to be here on the campus. I've always wanted to come and visit. And I'm really honored to speak to a department that's done such amazing scholarship. My background is education, and so I looked at some of the work that you're doing related to curriculum revision and telling the true story for sort of like civic education. Things like that, initiatives like that will go a long way. So I really admire the work that you're doing. This is my second time seeing Lina, and it just grabs my heart every time. And Lina's story is remarkable, not because it's unique, but because you know that there are tens of thousands of children who've experienced that and much worse. And Save Ukraine, as Craig was mentioning, sort of provides the counter story to this. We assisted Lina and her family with sort of the recovery from trauma and the reintegration and rehabilitation into communities. Save Ukraine has been doing this since 2014. Mykola Kuleba is our founder. He is a former ombudsman for children for the government of Ukraine. He also was just awarded the Citizen Courage Award for individuals who go to great lengths and at great risk for the lives of others. He leads an amazing team of 300 staff and volunteer heroes who work 24/7 to be on the ready to rescue a child or a family. So far, we have rescued, as of yesterday, 1,162 children. This is over 70% of all children who have been rescued in Ukraine since 2022. It's an amazing feat, and it's also very dangerous. We're the only organization, the largest organization in Ukraine that provides the full continuum of services. When I say full, it's very much the rescue. Mykola himself dubs his effort as Save Ukraine's Underground Railroad, which is basically a clandestine rescue mission that takes months to prepare and is very, very dangerous. So everything from that rescue to trauma recovery, connecting children with their families, providing the legal support that they need, helping them heal from their physical and psychological trauma, and then finally reintegrating them into communities and new homes. Every story describes the same trajectory. It's erasing identities through indoctrination, abduction, forcible transfer, and militarization, all for feeding the Russian military pipeline so that young children or boys can grow up and continue the war, not just against Ukraine, as you well know, but against NATO and the United States. In October, we released a report that with War Child UK that interviewed over 200 children. And sort of the top level, sort of the key highlights of this were, Well over 40% of the children had been forcibly transferred or abducted to Russia or Serbia, Belarus, and even in a couple of cases, North Korea. Over 30% were enrolled in military camps where they had to train using grenades and guns and everything. And 10% witnessed or were the victims of sexual violence and torture. And I think it's important to share the stories, so I'm going to share a couple that will be a bit hard to hear. But one of the stories that stood out the most to me was a child saying the hardest thing for him wasn't being kidnapped, it was watching his friend being killed. They had found, the Russian soldiers had found a message, the message thread on his phone from a Ukrainian soldier, could have been a family member, we don't know. But they tortured him very brutally in horrible ways, and they reported that he died of a blood clot. And this is the norm. I don't know how much, I know, limited in time, but let me just talk quickly about the militarization. All boys are tracked into eventually going to the front lines. Girls are tracked to bear children. I just want to share with you, I hope I put it in here, yes. So this is something that was released last December. It's not supposed to be an A4 paper, but some of it's cut off. But basically it says, yeah, you're not a child, you're the foundation of tomorrow. Don't listen to those who tell you there's still time. Happiness doesn't wait. Waiting means fear, and you're not afraid to give birth. At 12, you know how the world works. At 13, you feel love. At 14, you can bring life into the world. And by 16, you're already raising your second child. With every passing day, your motherland needs you more and more. This is not just for Ukrainian children, this is for all children in Russia and Ukraine. And I'll just end with another story. Every child has a purpose in this pipeline. Even those who are born sick. We rescued a mother a few weeks ago from Kherson who has 3 children. She was tortured periodically in basements. At the birth of her last child a few months ago, she witnessed babies and toddlers tied up to their cribs and their blood being drawn and packed by the military to take to the field. There's nothing that is not used for this. And the amount of money that the Russian Federation is spending towards the militarization of their youth has grown 4-fold since the start of this war. It's now at $3 billion US dollars. So we've been terribly hampered. Nathaniel's been hampered. We've been hampered by the cessation of USAID funding, and we are, stepping up the effort to fundraise. But this team is amazing. Despite all of this, they are tremendously hopeful and optimistic about what can happen, and they're not getting dissuaded, despite all the efforts by the Russian Federation to cage in people who might try to escape through new legislation or through new legislation such as requiring all guardians to re-register adopted children or guardian children under the Russian Federation, to prosecute children as young as 14 for extremism and because they follow a pro-Ukrainian thread on their phone, or restricting their movement through requiring another passport. It's all about identifying who the children are and being able to track them. So sorry, it's a very sad note, but this is a sad situation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. So before I get rolling, this is my first time in Ann Arbor. I've been here an hour and 45 minutes, and I've already been to Zingerman's. You know how to make a Reuben. I'll give you that. So I'm Nathaniel Raymond. I lead the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale that starting in 2022, we were given the mission by the United States Department of State and the U.S. intelligence community to identify where and how many children had been taken from Ukraine into Russia. We produced a report at the start of 2023, which was the evidentiary basis for the International Criminal Court indictment against Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova for the war crime of deportation of civilians, in this case, children, from one country to another, which is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. As part of that, we identified 6,000 children that were in re-education camps in an area that stretched from the Black Sea to the Eastern Pacific, over 3,500 miles. We did that using a combination of what's called OSINT, open source intelligence, with IMINT, imagery intelligence, using very high resolution satellite reconnaissance to identify where the children were being held and to also track the journeys of the children from areas in Ukraine, Kherson, which you saw in the film, the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and elsewhere. And when we were given that mission, we initially didn't know if it was possible to do. But the breakthrough was what we call in the intelligence field a tradecraft failure by the Russians. Anyone want to guess what it was? Anyone has a teenager with a phone? They left their location services on. And we were able to extract their latitude and longitude from selfies that they were taking with the children. And we turned the selfies from their propaganda photos with the kids into basically telemetry for plotting satellites. And we were able to then put those locations under constant surveillance. And we began to understand that what we were looking at was a industrial system of child abduction that is the single largest incident of child abduction and conflict since World War II, and what's known as the Russia case, which was the Germanification of Polish children by the Third Reich that involved changing their names, giving them new passports, birth certificates, and that was the basis of the 8th Nuremberg trial, what's known as the Russia case. One of the first times that the phrase crimes against humanity was used was referring to what we call, separate from the war crime of deportation, is the crime of transfer from one national and ethnic group to another. That crime is a component act of genocide. And so since that report, we transitioned to follow the children to Belarus and to track the more than 2,000 children that were being held there. Then we were given our hardest mission, and this is what I'll focus on before I end here, which was the Biden administration tasked us with infiltrating Russia's national adoption databases in 3 interconnected websites that connected to databases where Ukrainian children from Ukrainian institutions were being hid deceptively for adoption and fostering as if they were Russian orphans. And we had a breakthrough using wallpaper, of all things. So we're using all this fancy technology, whatever. The breakthrough was an analyst saw a photo of a child standing in front of a teal and yellow wall as a Russian orphan in this database. And what we realized is that that wallpaper we had seen before in the propaganda photos of the kids initially taken from Ukraine. So we started searching for wallpaper. And once we did, we realized amongst the 312 approximately children we could identify that we knew were Ukrainian, that about 50% of them were with their siblings in the system. And so what I want to end with here is that what's at stake? Let's be clear. If we fail to get these, we estimate 35,000 children in 210 locations back. If we fail to do that, it means that the special protected status under the Geneva Convention, which prevents children from being traded as hostages, POWs, and spies, which mandates their return unilaterally without condition, that will be destroyed if we barter for these children. and they're not returned unilaterally, which means it's not just about Ukraine's children. In the wars of the future, children will be used as poker chips in a dangerous card game where they will be taken as a strategic asset. We can't let that happen.
Yeah, first of all, let me underline what Nate just pointed out there, because I think there's a great deal of emphasis in Washington, D.C. right now to make the return of the children, be a part of the negotiating process. And the danger of that is that the Russians will simply start saying, well, okay, if you give us all of this land back, you can have your kids back. And that makes it part of the negotiation process rather than the observance of human rights. The kids have to come back independent of any other concessions made in the negotiations process. That's absolutely indispensable. Otherwise, we're going to promote the whole issue of stealing children as a part of conflict. So it's an indispensable part of the negotiation process, but not a negotiating chip.
Thank you so much for these really excellent comments. We're going to go ahead and open this up for Q&A. We have a microphone set up on this side and a microphone set up on this side. Feel free to come up to the microphone on your own, and we can begin queuing questions. And while people are coming up, perhaps I'll ask the first question here to all three of you, and you can kind of negotiate among yourselves who answers first. This film was a story about Lina, obviously, but it was also a story about her mother, largely a story about her mother in some ways. And her mother's extraordinary efforts to keep her children safe and then to help her children heal once they were finally back in Ukraine. Half of the film was about her experience trying to reestablish stability and security and then help Lina with her speech problems. And all through this story, we see several different adults doing their jobs to try to help children heal and maintain a sense of stability. We see a speech therapist and a teacher, all of whom are really invested in these kids. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it takes in a society like Ukraine to help a child heal from the trauma that they've experienced. You talked a little bit about this, the many different steps, and what is being done to assist Ukrainian children in the hopes of having as normal and healthy a childhood as possible in a brutal modern war.
It takes a village, first of all. Save Ukraine, as I said, has a large staff. We have some excellent case managers. They themselves have been, many of them have been rescued themselves from the behind Russian lines. We completed a series of focus groups about a month or so ago related to the healing. And I want to make a point about the mother in particular. All mothers whom we had interviewed in our focus group, all parents basically, were ignoring their own stress, were ignoring their own trauma and focused on that of the children, which the child knows if the parent has trauma. So, making a correction in the therapy that our referral network managers were giving was an important point there. But we work with a number of other communities, community NGOs, churches, who all have access to resources. Our trauma recovery is done through our Hope and Healing Centers. We have 25 centers through which all types of victims, whether they be elderly people, trafficked individuals, full families, or orphans, have a place for their recovery and targeted programs using a case management system It usually lasts between 3 and 6 months. And in some cases, it can last longer. It's never enough. It takes a lot of resources, but we really do work with all of Ukraine and on their resources, the civil society organizations and hospitals to provide that care.
So what is important about the film you saw is that the mother, Lina's mother, goes on this long circuitous journey. Most of those journeys, when they were still possible, they're no longer possible. When they were possible by the parents in the early phase of the war, it was sometimes mothers, but mostly grandmothers. And I had an opportunity to be at Ukraine House with, as part of the Ukrainian embassy, when they had some of the children who had been released in Washington. And I make a rule not to be in the room with the kids, not to talk to the kids, and not to let the kids know who me or my team is. Because, and this is very important, because many of them are still looking for their parents. And if they find out that we're the hunters, they get their expectations up and they want to talk to us about what we know. And we actually, for their safety and for our success, we don't want them to know. And that's very hard. But I will talk to the grandmothers. And I said, if there's any Ukrainian grandmothers in the room, you're going to love this. I said to them, the Russians made a grievous error. Never piss off a Ukrainian grandmother. Ukrainian grandmothers are fierce. And in the early phase, as Save Ukraine can tell you, the grandmothers were the main individuals inserting behind enemy lines, and in some cases getting kids out, in one case through a bathroom window. Okay, so they were unstoppable. That's fantastic. Should be honored. That is not good enough, because for me, the story of the grandmothers and the mothers is not the story that we should end up be telling. It should be a story about global diplomatic intervention to enforce international humanitarian law and human rights. Anytime you're reliant on grandmas and moms to have to be heroes in the absence of, let me check notes, NATO, then we have a problem. The UN Security Council should be the one dealing with this, not Ludmila and Grushenka. But in the absence of our political leadership as the United States and our political leadership as the global community, it is up to them to do that. It is a sign of their heroism. It's also a sign of our collective failure.
I have spent hundreds of hours with the characters in this film, and I must say that they are the strongest people you could possibly imagine, and particularly Lina's mother. She is one tough cookie, and runs that family and gathered everybody together, and went off on that extraordinary trek through Russia, and you just have to admire them. They are fantastic. I certainly echo Nate's view that this shouldn't be their responsibility. The international community should be taking this on. But the sad fact is that they don't, and therefore rescues are still necessary. And I think Save Ukraine plays a indispensable role in that whole process, and I think deserves a lot of the credit. We raise money for rescues. It ends up costing about $9,000 to rescue a kid and put them through the entire process. That is to say, the process from the beginning to the end of rehabilitation and then reintegration into society. And so we're pleased to be able to do that. And when you stop and think of it, saving a life, recapturing a child from captivity, these are extraordinary steps for very, very little money. So I think it's incumbent upon the American people, even if the U.S. government doesn't do its responsibilities, and these days the U.S. government does not, it's incumbent upon the American people to do what they can and to help out in that process and put pressure on the government too. It's inexcusable that we're having these situations where we have to go out begging people for money in order to be able to get captures or to recapture children. It's inexcusable that there are people freezing to death today, right now, in Ukraine, because of the lack of the funding that once was there. So putting pressure on the U.S. government to do its part, I think, is extraordinarily important as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go ahead and open it up to the audience now. Feel free to come up to the microphones and ask your questions.
I can get us started. Can each of you talk a little bit about your number one priorities right now and maybe how other people can help? Exactly.
Did everyone hear that question? Yeah.
Our number one priority right now is keeping people alive through the winter. There are more important things in terms of long-term strategy, in terms of what we'd like to get done, but they don't count for anything if the people don't survive the winter. And the temperatures are down to 30 below zero. I mean, it's extraordinarily cold. It's very, very hard to survive when you don't have any power. You're living in an apartment building in Kyiv, for example. You have no power, and the internal temperatures within the buildings are way below zero. So people have to survive, and it doesn't take an awful lot. One heavy-duty sleeping bag will keep you away. Will keep you working, alive during the course of the night. You won't be warm, but you'll survive the night. And this is, I think, we procure them in Ukraine. They're made in Ukraine, and they cost like $55. Like nothing compared to what the consequences are if people don't have them. We have tried to distribute them out on the front lines, both to troops, because they die too of the cold, and to the civilians that still live in frontline villages. And it's life-saving. It's life-saving support. So that's the immediate objective. There will be many, many other objectives. Obviously, we need an enormous rehabilitation effort in the entire country, and I think we're learning a lot just from Save Ukraine's activities in rehabilitation and readjustment. And I think that will be a big part, even in the time of peace. There will be an enormous need in that area.
Yeah, I have weekly calls with my colleagues in Kyiv, and sometimes they're really just shivering. I mean, it's not just the people that we've rescued that need help. It's people that are actually doing this work who still do it, on call, 24/7 in freezing weather, with apartments not getting energy, and their fear of their own children who are left in their apartments when air raids happen. So it's doing this tremendous work under trauma and trying to alleviate that trauma through mitigating the situation with the cold right now. That is a priority for us as well. But also something that keeps me up at night is, the window is closing in terms of of our ability to get kids out. I mentioned earlier that that Russia is putting an administrative cage around everything that we do to first of all register youth and children, whether it's requiring that guardians re-register their adopted children as Russians, and if they don't do that, then they're taken by the Russian state. Or this new passport requirement, which is a way to track children and families who might be trying to leave occupied territories or Russia through Belarus, that pathway that you saw to come to Kyiv. So if you request a passport, then that means that you're on the radar and you're going to be tracked, right? And then the third, as I mentioned, is how they've amended their laws to be able to put away children as young as 14 for life for what they call extremism, right? They're going to stay there. The age of conscription is 17, so they're trying to keep as many youth there as possible. So our window of being able to save these children is closing as more teens get to the age of conscription. And I think we're going to see more older youth try to come and escape as well. So that's a priority in fundraising for those rescues. Because of these restrictions that Putin has put on the ability for families to travel and kids to communicate with Ukraine, it's going to cost more. So fundraising for that is really important as well.
So I want to answer your question about priorities by putting in context how huge a challenge it is trying to determine how many of the kids there are, their names, and where they are. Let's talk about 9/11 for a second. 9/11 was the single largest missing persons case in U.S. history. It was 2,995 individuals. The FBI deployed 3,000 agents, which was one agent for every missing person, approximately, plus an additional support personnel component that brought it to nearly 7,500, 8,000 personnel for under 3,000 missing. They were in 14 acres. They were all dead. And we spent $250 million over the better part of about 18, 19 years to close that case. Okay, let's talk about this in the context of Ukraine. We have 35,000 children estimated missing. They are not dead, which means they're growing. We do not have a DNA database. We don't have a central case management system. They are over 3,500 miles. They are in the custody of a foreign intelligence service. We have spent, in terms of intelligence and law enforcement, including the work of our team, maybe 20 to 30 million over 4 years, barely. And I'm including the European numbers on that. And so going back to what's my priority? They're aging. So I've spent 26 years working missing person cases, and I never thought I would say this. I loved the other ones I worked on because the victims were dead. These victims are not dead. And as they grow, having worked cases where we brought children back into contact with their parents as adults who were taken during the dirty wars in Central America, particularly Guatemala, in the 80s, they were reunited in their late 30s and 40s. And I know what it looks like doing that, and it's awful. And so the point is, what's our focus? Our focus is to try to get as much intelligence as quickly as possible. As our team we're running out of money. We're facing layoffs, and we're going to grind to a halt. Don't worry about us. Don't cry for us, Argentina. Maybe we'll become baristas, and that'll be the worst thing that happens to us. But that the problem isn't us and our jobs. The problem is that no one's coming to replace us if we go down as intel support to the Ukrainians and to Save Ukraine and to all the other groups in this ecosystem. And so I'm fine if someone else comes in. But based on those numbers I just gave you, this is the single largest child kidnapping since World War II. And we have spent less money than you spend on toilet paper and toilet services for the 8th Fleet on deployment in the Mediterranean for 3 months, okay? We've spent barely nothing. And so it's amazing what we've accomplished, but it's operationally like canoeing to the damn moon to try to not have basic elements we would put in play in the first 3 hours of an Amber Alert in Ypsilanti if it was one American kid with the FBI. So I want you to put in perspective before we pat ourselves on the back here that we are deeply behind the 8 ball 4 years out. The kids who were taken at 6 months are in kindergarten now.
Let me add one comment on that. And I think Nate's absolutely right. But the problem is that the United States has bowed out of this situation. The United States has bowed out of the Ukraine situation. It's bowed out of Europe. And we cannot succeed as long as the United States government continues to operate the way it's operating right now. It's just a sad fact. I consider myself to be nonpartisan. I've had people trying to peg me as a Republican or a Democrat from the beginning of time. And I keep answering, I'm an American. I work for the United States of America. I do what I think is right for the United States of America, and I don't really give a damn about Republicans and Democrats. But right now, if the midterm elections go the wrong way, if the forces of democracy, if I can put it in non-political terms, if the forces of democracy don't come out of this on top in these elections, Ukraine is lost. And we have to be realistic and sober about that. That is critical. And it's going to be tough enough, even if the forces of democracy win in the election, because it will be an uphill fight to preserve the democracy, not just in Ukraine, but in our own country. And so you ask, what is our first priority? I am moving Ukraine aside between now and November. My wife will pick it all up. She runs it anyway. So it's, she can handle Ukraine. I will watch over her shoulder on it and kibitz from time to time. She'll ignore me as usual. But I will move to full-time working on fixing the problem in the United States, because you can't fix Ukraine if you don't fix the US first. That's the top priority.
Okay. We are, I think, are we ending at 6:30? We have about 10 more minutes for, and if you don't want to get up, they can bring a microphone to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for both the movie and this panel. My name is Oleksiy. I'm an assistant professor of Ukrainian literature and culture here at the University of Michigan. My question is, first of all, a notion that the whole topic of abduction of children is not new to Ukraine and Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history, starting from the Mongol invasion through Second World War, when hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children were taken for forced labor in the Nazi Germany and Germanized, and many of them remained there forever without their parents, without seeing back Ukraine. So what is happening now is a continuation of a long historical national trauma. My question is, I guess, regarding the infrastructure of rescuing. You mentioned many times that you do so many efforts to rescue these children from there. And I assume that your activity unfolds somehow in the occupied territories and even in Russia, which is very complicated, dangerous, probably also secret. If you are allowed and if it's possible to tell a little bit about this infrastructure. Do you have local collaborators or volunteers like the Alexander from the movie who helped this family? And I guess without these local volunteers, many cases are just cannot be successful, as Lina's case. And just last notion, since I brought here my entire course of Ukrainian cinema, and I know that my students will be asking me the same question about the monumentality of this story, of the successful story, with the, I would say, with a happy end, if we might use this term at all, because after all, this family remained united with all the children, both parents and even a grandma. But thousands, if not dozens of thousands of stories of people's lives, of children's lives, are not like that. So the last comment was just a comment, not a question, but thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. We get it asked a lot, and obviously we can't share a lot of details, but it does take months to coordinate a rescue. It takes training. This is why I'm concerned about the closing space around children having access to their cell phones and their content. We usually find out about kids. Well, we get data from Nathaniel, but we also get data from the rescuees themselves. They say there's so-and-so age 12 here, there's, and they have a brother and a sister here, and so forth. We prepare legal documents that we know that they're going to require at different checkpoints. We train them the best that we can on how to respond to questions from Russian military. We work with, grandmothers and guardians who agree to not just take their children, but take, several children with them and claim them as their own. We do have helpers along the way. Some of them have been killed. Some of the people, our drivers have been killed. Every case is different, but it definitely hinges on the data that we get when we first rescue a child. We record everything and we document information for war crime purposes. So all of that data is used. And to your point about the movie, one of my questions, clear, was similar. It's such a large family that we're able to get out at the early stages. And the family is the point of contention with Putin. He's trying to disrupt and destroy the family bonds. So I'm personally curious about the story of the family as well. So if Silky wants to do a part 2, I invite her to do that, because especially since the family unit has been the target of Putin.
I will say that the family is a lot happier today than the end of that film, so that things are working out pretty well for them. But it still is uphill slug. Look at the number of drones that hit Kyiv every night now, and they have to live through that too.
And I want to hop in here, especially given the lack of operational details that Save Ukraine can share, to give you some operational details about what the counterintelligence environment is that we work in on this. So I can be more explicit, I think, than Save Ukraine can. The databases which contain the critical information about the kids that are in the adoption and fostering system. So there's 4 groups of kids: those that are in the camps, those that were taken from institutions inside Ukraine, many of whom with severe physical and mental disabilities, who are being put into forced adoption and fostering. Those are not the camp kids. There are 2 other groups that we know the least about: kids taken directly from the battlefield when their parents are killed, and those who were taken directly from their families, which was how we initially got into the case, tracking the filtration camps outside Mariupol, where parents that were taken for long-form interrogation by DPR, Donetsk People's Republic so-called, and LPR, were put into interrogation camps, and their kids were separated from them at the camps. And so those corpuses of data about them are rigged by GRU, by Russian military intelligence, cyber intelligence. And we have had a problem where people who are not trained to do the type of things we do, including certain police services and news organizations who I will not name, but maybe in New York, maybe. You can guess. Those individuals have entered databases where there was burglar alarms, and Russian intelligence detected them and then started destroying files about the kids. Okay, and so this is like the Milton Bradley game operation. It's not just finding the data in the detective story, it's doing it. Your SWAT team, cyber-wise, going up through the sewer of a bank in a hostage situation, and we often watch people blow themselves up call them and say, hey, you just endangered the data. And then we wait for them to get blown up cyber-wise, and then we have to come up behind them and pick up the pieces. So thing one is Russia's tracking what investigators are interested in and using that to remove PII, personally identifiable information about the kids. The second thing is they're moving the kids around. And so why our work with satellites is so crucial is we're tracking planes, trains, and automobiles. And often Putin's presidential air wing itself was involved, and military units. So this is not higgledy-piggledy, a kid in the back of a car. In some cases it's like that, but it's actually large motor coaches under armed escort to military bases, okay? And then you also have to understand here, so they're engaged in deception about the locations of the children and their identities. Here's the third part. They are engaged in compellence with parents and community members in the occupied areas. And so a critical thing we have not shown is we actually have very granular intelligence about the family members and community members and teachers who have been coerced into sending kids to the camps. We've actually tried to hide the information about people who will be seen in some parts of Ukrainian society as collaborators to prevent vigilante violence. And so you have to understand, from a counterintelligence perspective, the environment that Save Ukraine is in is a nightmare. And if you do it wrong, it's not that you just don't get the right answer, you've endangered the kids by showing the Russians your hand. And so we're attacked, we've been attacked 9 times at Yale in complex cyber operations, not to find out what we know, but for the Russians to determine what we don't know, because they're trying to find our gaps in intelligence to figure out where to park the kids so we can't see them. It's a shell game, but with children.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight and participating and for sponsoring this film. A special thanks to Cameron for helping to arrange this event. I think I speak for all of us when I say how moving and haunting and how much imperative I feel for this cause. And I sincerely hope that by this time next year, we're talking about different issues and that many of these children are able to be rescued. All of these children are able to be rescued before the window closes that you're talking about. Please join me in thanking our panelists with a round of applause.
I think Cameron will be sharing more information about Save Ukraine, so you can donate if you want to and track our work. So.
And there are brochures from Save Ukraine
Great,
and from the Humanity Funds in the front desk. Just pick them up, take a look. And if you feel like donating to one or the other, it makes no difference to us.